Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Sandy Smith, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Warrant Officer Cherie Thayers. This evening, we warmly welcome the family of Private Cyril Ashdown Waghorn and Corporal John Roy Waghorn, whose story will be told shortly. We also warmly welcome the Tri-Service Cadet delegation in attendance. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. If you are able, I now invite you to please stand and join in singing the national anthem. Please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just two of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operation for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private Cyril Ashdown Waghorn and Corporal John Roy Waghorn. Cyril Ashdown was born at Emmaville, New South Wales in early 1889, the fourth surviving child of Thomas and Elizabeth Waghorn. Youngest sibling, John Roy, was born 5 years later in December 1894. Not long after John's birth, the family moved to the Sydney suburb of Petersham. Cyril attended Stanmore Public School with his older brothers Thomas, Arthur and Harry, while John, who was a member of the militia, completed his education at the Annandale Public School. Their brother Harry died in 1900, leaving 6 of the 11 Waghorn children to reach adulthood. After finishing schooling, the brothers remained in the Petersham area of Sydney. Cyril found work as a salesman and clerk, while John became a storeman. After their father's death in 1911, the brothers stayed close to their grieving mother, helping to support her with their incomes. John enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 8th of March 1915 and was allotted to the newly formed 18th Battalion. After 3 months of initial training, he left Australia on the 25th of June 1915, bound for Egypt and then the Gallipoli Peninsula. 2 days before John landed on Gallipoli, on the 14th of August 1915, his older brother Cyril signed his attestation papers in Sydney, insisting that he couldn't let his younger brother go off to war alone. After a few weeks with the 6th Battalion, Cyril was allotted to the reinforcements of the 4th Battalion in late September 1915. On Gallipoli, John survived the battalion's brutal introduction to the campaign during the Bloody August Offensive and moved into the defensive role at Courtney's Post. He was admitted to a casualty clearing station in late October, suffering from jaundice, and was evacuated for treatment in Malta. He remained here for the remainder of 1915, rejoining A Company of the 18th Battalion at Tel El Kabir in Egypt in January 1916. Having left Australia in late 1915, Cyril was taken on strength of the 1st Battalion in Egypt, and in mid-March 1916. 5 days later, he left Egypt, arriving in France and making his way to the Western Front. Less than a month after his arrival in France, Cyril was admitted to the hospital suffering from influenza. He rejoined the 1st Battalion in late April, just in time to return to the trenches on the Somme. The battalion remained in the area for over the summer and autumn of 1916, alternating between trench duties and training and support work behind the lines. John and the 18th Battalion had spent their first months on the Western Front in what was known as the nursery sector, around Armentières. By July, however, they had moved to the Somme Valley, where they took part in the fighting around Pozières in July and August. After a brief, quiet spell in Belgium, the 18th Battalion returned to the Somme in October. By early November 1916, the brothers were about 25 kilometres apart. John at Ribemont with the 18th Battalion, and Cyril to the northeast outside Bapaume with the 1st Battalion. Just after midnight on the 5th of November, the men of the 1st Battalion left their trenches and attacked the German positions around Bapaume. Amid the darkness and rain, Private Cyril Waghorn was hit by machine gun fire. When the battalion returned to the right reserve section of the Allied trenches later that day, he was one of 71 men declared missing in action. A month after the attack, Cyril's name was recorded on a list of deaths provided by the Germans. It was determined that Cyril Waghorn had most likely been captured after being wounded during the offensive and had died and been buried at the dressing station near Bugny. He was 27 years old. Before Cyril's fate had officially been confirmed, John was admitted to the hospital in late November 1916, suffering from septic sores over his legs. Having spent the winter of 1916 and 1917 recovering in hospital, he returned to the 18th Battalion in late January 1917. The 18th Battalion had become involved in the advance following German forces' retreat to the Hindenburg Line. John was promoted 3 times during this period, to Lance Corporal in early March, to Temporary Corporal in late March, and then Corporal in April. In early May, the battalion took part in the Second Battle of Bullecourt. Although the Australians eventually captured and held their positions, the fighting came at a cost of about 7,000 Australian casualties. During the fighting, on the 3rd of May 1917, John Waghorn was killed in action. He was 22 years old. In Australia, Elizabeth was informed of her son's fates in late May 1917. Commemorative notices for the 2 brothers flooded into the local papers from grieving family and friends. John's remains were never recovered from the battlefield at Bullecourt. He is commemorated today on the Australian National Memorial at Villers-Bretonneux, alongside more than 10,000 Australians who died while fighting in France and who have no known grave. After the end of the war, Cyril's burial place was identified. His remains were exhumed and reinterred at Archier-le-Grand Communal Cemetery Extension in Arras. Cyril and John's names are listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. A photograph of Private Cyril Waghorn's headstone and a photograph of Corporal John Roy Waghorn's name listed on the Villers-Bretonneux Memorial are displayed today by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Cyril Ashdown Waghorn and Corporal John Roy Waghorn, who gave their lives for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of our director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you.